it's always better to have a plan that has to be adapted at the moment than to not have a plan and you have to try to create the plan as the moments happen. Welcome, everyone, to the Strategic Leader Cast. I'm Chris, and I have today with me Tom Sivak. And the reason that I have him with me today is because we're going to talk about a topic that I think easily translates to great lessons for business, even though business often doesn't think of Tom's world until the rotating air circulator has already been hit by the poo. So, Tom, thanks for joining us. And how are things in Chicago today?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, it's good to be here today. Chicago, it's a nice, beautiful, sunny day, sunny and 70, which is not the norm. Many of these days, it's either going to be really hot, really cold, or somewhere in between. But good to be with you today, and thanks for having me.
So Tom and I met at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Building Resilience Conference, and it was really interesting for me, not being an EMA professional, to be surrounded by so many people that worked for FEMA, DHS, insurance companies, Airbnb. We had all kinds of different people coming together to talk about building resilience. Tom, help me understand and help our audience understand what it means to be resilient in your world.
Ultimately, when we start thinking about resilience, one of the things that comes into mind is someone being able to respond to the stressors, not necessarily the shocks of a catastrophic incident happening within an organization, a small business, a large business. It doesn't necessarily matter. And it's all nested in the world of disasters, whether it's a natural disaster, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, you name it, whether it's a human-induced disaster, which unfortunately today we have to be thinking about terrorism, active shooter type incidents, those types of events that might actually be that crisis that takes place within our communities. And then the technological hazard, which, we always have to be thinking about cyber and the responses to cyber, but also at the same time, there's all these technological hazards that are out there about risk within a community overall. So when I bucket these, being resilient is actually allowing us the capability to respond to, recover from as quickly as possible to get back to whatever norms are going to be in the aftermath of a catastrophic or any type of incident that might take place within a community or within an individual entity as well.
I think right now in the business community, certainly cyber issues are front of mind relative to risks out there. And so every day I'm hearing about companies that are putting different things in place, and they think about these plans. But that's what I found interesting about the conference was that it's generally based upon, like you said, a disaster, whether it's a natural disaster, a tornado, a flood. Those are things that become huge. The impact is broad. And when I was hearing about the definition of resilience, my simple mind went to resilience means that your organization continues to function after that fact.
100%.
Can continue to pursue that mission that your mission is. So a community continues to be a community. You have a place to live. You have places to buy food. You have places to go to school. You have the hospital still available. All those things, a resilient community can still persevere through all that. And that's why I was really interested in having this conversation, because the word perseverance kept coming to mind with regard to a business having to deal with this. Oftentimes, it's overly simplified and I think disrespected by a lot of people that are outside the business world, where they think, well, businesses are only interested to continue to make money. That's really overly simplistic, because if I'm running a business and I'm faced with a situation like what you were talking about, whether it's disaster, whether it's a cyber attack, it's not just the money-making aspect of the business I'm concerned about. I also have stakeholders that expand well past that. I have my employees. I have vendors that I deal with. I have customers that are dependent upon me. I have all these different tentacles that go out. It's like what you're talking about in a community. If a community is impacted by a disaster, it's not just that person whose house is lost. It's about the stresses on the system. So how did you get to this point? Were you born in the EMA? I mean, when you woke up in the morning, because I know you weren't born in Chicago. I think you said you were originally from Michigan or Ohio, or I mean,
East
I don't
Cleveland,
think you're allowed
Ohio.
to be
Yeah.
from both. What's
Yeah,
that?
I'm a Midwestern, born and raised, is the best way to put it. I've lived all over the Midwest, so anywhere from Ohio to Indiana to Michigan to Wisconsin and Illinois, where I am currently. If I go back many years ago, I was always fascinated by fire trucks.
Mm.
I always wondered what it would like to be a firefighter, and I got to experienced that in high school. We moved to Syracuse, New York, and I was a volunteer firefighter at the young age of 18. And that's where my interest in emergency response and first response took place. And so through my high school, my senior year of high school, all the way through college, I had the opportunity to, in the summers, be a volunteer firefighter and continue expanding on my experience at that point. When emergency management came into existence for me was when I started my career with the American Red Cross. It was a time when Hurricane Katrina took place. Uh, but ultimately, what was very interesting at that point was seeing a very catastrophic incident taking place with many people that are impacted. And as I saw that, I had this drive to help. And where I went to school, and I went to Marquette University, it was always about care for the person. It was always about focusing on community. And so I always had this drive to go out and help people. I started to understand what crisis meant for family members and making sure that we provided to them basically a home, shelter, that food, clothing, and shelter component. But I was kept being drawn into the disaster realm and interested in it. So after my time at the Ronald McDonald House Charities here in Chicago, I went to the American Red Cross. And when I was there, one of the things I started focusing a lot on was communities that were impacted by disasters, especially with apartment fires. We had a lot of apartment fires that took place in my tenure there. And so one of the things that I started thinking about is how can we build resilience within this community right now? With all these apartment fires, I kept seeing some of our clients and some of the survivors from the apartment fires had actually been double and triple clients to us, which was they'd been in 2 to 3 different apartment fires. From that point, what we started to do was say, what can we do to build resilience within the community, which was a renter's insurance initiative across the Emergency Management Agency in Kalamazoo County, Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, and also the American Red Cross, was to really enhance this insurance initiative for renter's insurance. And that to me was one of these initial indicators of how do we build resilience personally, which was that renter's insurance, and make it an understandable approach about how much it actually does cost and be able to take away some of the assumptions that it would actually be a little bit more than what it was.
One of the
Uh,
things that I'm hearing you talk about, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's kind of an important thing relative to where my brain goes is resource management. When I'm talking to companies about strategy, how you manage your resources is going to really impact the things you're capable of doing. And when you're talking about, you having multiple apartment fires from the same, I guess, victim, that stresses the system out. The system has a certain amount of resources, and then if the same people are using those resources over and over again, that's a really inefficient way to be able to manage those very, very thin resources. It's not like we are bubbling over with cash in all of these organizations that provide services like the American Red Cross or Ronald McDonald House. It's not like they are flush with cash and they can afford to be inefficient. Donors are going to be putting pressure on you and saying, hey, look, can we do anything about the fact that the number of people that are needing assistance is growing, but we also have recidivism. We have a lot of the same people needing those services. It'd be better if we can help them, like you said, be resilient on their own. How can they handle it? What can we do to put them in a position to not need these services again?
when I think about resources, Chris, I think about people are our most valuable resource. How do you get them over the hump after kind of a catastrophic event where you lose everything? We all have responsibilities. We have to provide food, clothing, shelter, make sure we take care of our health care, make sure we have, we could have jobs, right? Steady jobs and everything else like that. So I focused a
Mm.
lot on survivors in the first part of my career. But also at the same time, as I start to move forward, I started to look macro at the types of disasters that were happening. And one of the things I continued to better understand was risk. Risk has a price. And we had to figure out how do we buy down that risk. Insurance is a prime example of buying down risk. but also making sure that we have plans and policies and procedures in place to be able to respond to that risk and recover from it as quickly as possible. Like this is where this conundrum starts to take place about why does resilience, crisis, consequence, and emergency management, why do these things all start to come into form overall? At the same time, how do we make sure our most important resource people are more resilient as well and make sure they have those resources? So that's where those two start to interconnect.
One of the comments that you keep making, and I want to make sure that I drive this home, is the value of people. You were talking about people are the biggest resource. So I could look at it a couple different ways. The more people you have in a community, the more that resource of the organization, like emergency management, has the potential to be stressed because of people, because you want to be able to provide services for those people. And one of the things I think about when you're talking about building up the resiliency of these people is you're also enhancing the system by doing that. What I mean by that is people who are in need after any kind of issue, whether it's a medical emergency, natural disaster, something like this, when you have people in need, they're not necessarily going to be a force multiplier in terms of emergency management. They're not going to be able to help other people because they've got to take care of themselves. Their focus is going to be, I got to take care of my family. Where are we going to live? But when you have people that have been built up, they have resiliency in their own system, they've got insurance, they've done these planning things, they're a lot more willing then to step up and provide what I would consider that force multiplier in the community to be able to help. They're going to be the ones that are going to be out volunteering. They're going to be out there collecting resources and distributing resources. So you've got this volunteer mobility that happens because of the resilience. And people always step up. I'm not saying that there aren't people to step up. I'm saying the volume of the people that will be able to provide help is much better when those people have been able to help themselves.
The first thing I think about is all disasters start local and end local, which means when these disasters happen, it's the community that comes together. Disasters are complex. These catastrophic incidents are extremely complex. When you have a local community that is well established in preparedness, that has focused on how they respond to and recover from incidents, that they have focused on building their resilience both individually to that local community member or within the entirety of the community, it gets them onto a road to recovery a lot faster than communities that might not necessarily have that ability. And so what we
Right.
have to think about is the community members that are more resilient, that are buying down their risk and have that capability and ability to buy down their risk, and that can respond to and recover from those events and incidents quicker. What it allows them to do is it gets them to whatever norm's going to be for the rest of their life, because disasters have a psychological impact, a mental health impact. I think about the disasters that happened in the past, and a lot of the time what's happened is it's been this strong community that's come up and said, we're going to rebuild, we're going to be stronger, and we're going to be better because this happened.
For that community to be in that position, there has to be a lot of planning. And for people that are not aware of how emergency management works, in a county EMA or a city EMA, and when it's large enough, it really is a collaboration network. It's not like, okay, well, emergency management is going to handle this. No, emergency management is going to be a point of the spear, but they're collaborating with government agencies, nonprofit agencies, businesses, because certain businesses have a huge function when it comes to support in a natural disaster. I think back to Katrina, right? You had big truckloads from Lowe's and other companies just waiting on the highway to be able to deliver stuff. And I think this is one of the things that FEMA and other agencies learned after Katrina was how to better and more efficiently manage those things. So the lesson for business is think about whether or not your business is going to be one of those net needs or net providers in
I
an
like that.
emergency situation, because I think there's
Yeah.
going to be both. And I think if you can be actively engaged with EMA, your community will have a better chance of being able to bounce back quicker because these things have been thought of. One of my favorite training expressions, it's much better to think about something and never have it happen than have the first time you're thinking about it be the moment it's happening. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the thing with emergency management, but that's also the thing with business, which is one of the things I go back to one of my earlier comments. One of the reasons I want to have this conversation is everything you've talked about right now, I can easily translate to day-to-day operations of a business. Where are my weaknesses? Where are my weak points? Where are the challenges happening? What are competitors doing? What are customers needing? What are my employees needing? How am I providing for those needs? Am I able to provide those needs on a sustainable basis? What happens when I lose this vendor? What happens if I lose this contract? These are all things that, you know, looks like these two subjects are not related at all, but the experiences are actually very similar. So, what are the kind of things that you're seeing EMA do, in particular EM1? And I'd like to know more about what EM1's doing. What are the things that are going on to be able to provide emergency management with better tools to be better efficient and to provide more resiliency?
So let's talk about EMA for a second. Most emergency management agencies across this country are very small, actually. And so knowing your emergency management agency is extremely important, especially if you're a business provider that can actually help in a disaster. This is where that resiliency of the community comes into play. And so the more you can understand what emergency management does, which is basically consequence management, they're anticipating what the risk is going to be, what the types of disasters are going to be, you can then plan for how you're going to be able to respond to and recover from that particular incident overall. So, how does that filter into EM1? Ultimately, EM1 is an AI assisted software capability that helps communities with planning, policies, and preparedness on blue sky days. And then, in my vision, what I have is that when you can write your plans that are going to understand your community challenges, understand your community risk, when you know if you have to have an evacuation plan, a shelter in place plan, an active threat type of plan, a name the risk in your community, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, wildfires, name it. Having those plans at the ready is what EM1 is focusing on right now. Our focus is to make sure that we're building a tool to help people. It's a secure AI software platform that is closed circuit. And what that means necessarily is that you're going to be able to put your plans into this capability, especially if you're a large entity, and be able to help write those plans, policies, and procedures that are going to help you in a crisis that might in turn into a consequence, which is basically once that crisis turns into a catastrophic type incident, you're anticipating what the consequences are to get you back on the road to recovery as quickly as possible.
When you mentioned closed circuit, I think this is an important point because one of the consequences you want to be able to avoid is additional risk, cyber risk. And
Mhm.
from what I understand, and you can clarify this for me, when you're talking about closed circuit, you're talking about the fact that your software is going to be taking the stuff that a particular agency is feeding into it and assessing those items, but not necessarily sharing them out into the cloud. So if I'm the emergency management agency from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I take all of my written policies and I feed them into this tool, I'm not necessarily increasing my risk because they're not being exposed outside of that system, which is
Correct.
closed. Am I
Yeah.
understanding that correctly?
Yeah. Your instance is your instance. But then I also think about our business community, business recovery plans, business resilience plans, business preparedness plans, right? Like one of the things that we've done, that we've been trying to do for a very long time is make preparedness simple. And I think about, small jurisdictions, smaller stores to the biggest box stores. Everyone has to have business continuity plans. They have to have business recovery plans. They have to have cybersecurity plans on file to make sure that they're buying down that risk and know how they're going to respond to and recover from that event. Well, that's what EM1 does, right? So we focus on the enterprise of emergency management, public sector, private sector, nonprofit, non-government sector. We look at all of those sectors and we work within those sectors to make sure that we can look at that emergency management enterprise as it relates to building your consequence management plans.
Do you have template plans? So, for example, if a
Yeah.
client agency says we're going to submit all our documents, all our policies, all our existing plans to the system for an assessment, right? I'm imagining
Mhm.
the system's going to say, okay, here's where we're finding some gaps relative to current threat levels or current assumptions. And also, you don't have this plan, this plan, this plan, this plan. Does EM1 have sample template plans to be able to help those client agencies build those plans that don't exist? Right.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
We've created a best practice library to be able to synthesize that information to say, help build me a simplified template for a business response or recovery plan from a type of incident that takes place. In addition to that, one of the challenges that a lot of people are seeing now is they actually don't know what the risk of that community is. And
Right.
so being able to take a hazard mitigation plan from a particular community and saying, what's my risk? Or even just doing a quick search of the open internet or of an open AI saying, what's the risk in my particular jurisdiction? Rank them from 1 to 5, go. And it's going to at least give you a good idea about what the types of risks you're going to have within your community. Why is risk important? Because once you understand your risk, then you can start to work about ways that you're going to mitigate that risk. So when we talk about risk, there's always ways to mitigate that risk. It's a matter of when do we find time in the day. In the public sector, underfunded, understaffed, and under-resourced communities are a challenge today, and they continue to be a challenge. And so having an AI-enabled software like EM1, it gives you this capability to be able to double and triple your output. It takes you from
Well,
being that editor to a writer.
I think the other benefit is looking at this from a organizational eye is the ability to know what I don't know.
Mhm.
For someone to be able to point out to me the things where I have gaps in my plans, I just imagine that there are some plans that have existed out there that are no longer valid because the risks, as you pointed out, for that community have completely changed. That could be because of demographic shifts, new businesses in the area, geological issues, whatever. I mean, and plans have to be updated, 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 updated. And because these organizations run on a shoestring budget with small staffs, it becomes very, very difficult for them to keep those plans updated. And that's what I think I see EM1 bringing to the
Oh,
table for
100%.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you brought up something earlier. I've been in many rooms where people have said, "I never thought this would happen to me. We
Mm,
didn't train for this. We didn't
right.
exercise for this. We didn't plan for this." And we have to practice our plans. How do you get out if there's a fire? What happens if you have someone that's trying to get into the home? Who do you call? All these components, and I have 3 children, so the thing of making sure that they know what to do if something happens.
I remember when I was in grade school, not only we would have fire drills at the school, tornado drills, but the local fire department would encourage, home fire drills. Did you have a ladder from the second story? Do you have fire extinguishers? There was all these things put out there. And the reason, and this is going to lead me to another point, but to capitalize on your thing is there's no excuse for not being prepared. I mean, there's going to be some things where you just can't have seen it. It's what we call in the business world a black swan event,
Hmm.
where you just didn't know what was going to happen. You just had no idea. But
Right.
you can eliminate a lot of that with planning and just being aware. What makes it difficult, again, is the number of people that are working in these agencies is very small. They're overwhelmed with day to day tasks. For the business community, I think there's often enough staff, but they get bogged down in day to day tasks and things that are about driving revenue rather than about protecting revenue, rather than protecting, longevity, sustainability of the business. So these are some things that you got to build into the culture. This was another thing that I kept hearing about at the conference was building in this resilience culture in an organization. And so that when you go through your day-to-day activities, you can sit there and kind of automatically in your brain filter out, is this helping us be more resilient? Again, it's not a phrase that the business world thinks about, but
Yeah.
I think it's one that ought to be. So I was going to get to this next point here in terms of improving the way that these agencies work because of the AI in EM1. You get to be a little bit more forward thinking, be a planner rather than a reactor. And I think that is ultimately a huge step for organizational efficiencies. If I could be focusing more of my efforts on the planning phase versus having to be spinning my wheels reacting, that has to be important. Are you seeing significant improvements in this when clients are using EM1 or whatever else they're doing? Are you starting to see a trend in EMA where they are actively trying to be more proactive rather than reactive?
Yeah, emergency management in general is in a perpetual state of response right now, especially with underfunded, understaffed, and under-resourced agencies. I've seen it over the last 20 years of my career. It's continued to be just response, 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 response. And so that really starts to limit your blue sky days of where you can be planning for, training for, and exercising. I am seeing more forward leaning approaches to be able to respond to and recover from incidents a lot quicker. That's number one. The second thing is actually helping in that recovery phase as well. And because when an incident happens, when a community is impacted, they got to get back on that road to recovery as quickly as possible. So ultimately, yes, there is more proactivity. But I'll give you another example too, Chris. This is something I go back to where there's a lot of people that are worried that AI is taking people's jobs. When I was at the city of Chicago, I was responsible for the emergency management section as a deputy director. We had 77 neighborhoods. In my 7 years, I never got to all 77 of those neighborhoods. And in fact, if I could have, what I would have been doing more of is I would have been doing more trainings, more exercises, more community engagement to make sure that we were making those community members more resilient from disaster in general and understanding what the risk was within the community as well. But we didn't have that ability because we were in a perpetual state of response. We didn't have the staffing that we would have loved to have had. And
Right.
that is a norm right now.
I think, AI relative to what it's going to do in terms of impacting people, it's a huge subject, right? I'm in the business world, so there's concern about what is it going to mean to the shifting labor needs? Are people's roles going to be changed, or they're just going to be required fewer people? But in your world, it is a more clear advantage where AI brings to the table because you're trying to do more with less. And AI
Mhm.
is one of those things, one of those tools that helps you do more. And I think it is clearly an asset that needs to be considered at all levels of EMA. Just because, again, it's one of those things where people don't think about EMA until they need to think about EMA. In the
Right.
meantime, EMA is operating 24/7 in the background all the time so that someone can be prepared. And I imagine some of your challenges are governmental organizations when you're saying, "Hey, we need more budget," and they're not going to be able to necessarily give you more budget. This allows you to be able to accomplish many more of the things that you see as a necessary tool for EMA to be able to provide the services and provide that resilience and provide that recovery for whatever the incident is into the future. I see AI as one of those things where it can help you game plan. If you think about military strategy where they have sand tables and they're plotting out, anticipation from the enemy troops. Same thing here where AI could be helpful in game planning a scenario. What if this dam breaks? Or what if we have a tornado that goes right through Greenwood, Indiana? Because that never happens, right? So
Mm.
and it does. I'm just saying, for some
Yeah.
reason, Greenwood is a magnet for tornadoes. But what have been some of the big successes you've seen over the last few years with EM1, working with agencies, incorporating your tool? What successes have you seen?
We have hazardous materials across every single one of our communities. There's a Community Right to Know Act that's out there as it relates to
Mm.
extremely hazardous substances.
Yeah.
And this particular jurisdiction took every single one of these extremely hazardous substances that were within their community. And they actually took time to better understand what their risk looked like by assessing their emergency operations plans, by assessing the amount of chemicals that they have within their community so that they can better respond to and recover from incidents that could take place within that community. That was a prime example of being able to take the limited blue sky days, assess those particular emergency response plans, understand the types of hazards that might be in the community so that they can respond to that component.
I can't imagine what that would have looked like if you didn't have AI assistance. You would have to grab the material safety data sheet for every single one of those substances. And for those of you not in emergency management or emergency services or corporate world, business world, where you have to deal with material safety data sheets, pretty much every substance has one. Water has a material safety data
Mhm.
sheet. But if there's a hazardous material, you would look at that material safety data sheet to find out, okay, what's the treatment, what are the after effects, what precautions do you have to take, everything you need to know about whatever that material is. Back in when I had to deal with them, they were in binders. I'm sure they're on databases right now on a computer. But if I had to figure out in my community, I've got 250 of these materials floating around my community. Am I going to have the time to analyze as a human 250 materials safety data sheets and figure out what risks are going to be involved and what our community reaction is going to be if one of these spills or is in a fire or is tipped over from a truck or whatever. How long did it actually take to be able to accomplish that?
It didn't take them that long.
Yeah.
I think about if I go back to my time and pulling all that information, we probably wouldn't have thought that way. In my time, I wouldn't have ever said, hey, let's take a stop check moment. Let's look at actual risk in this community and let's figure out how we're going to mitigate that risk. The other things we're seeing with EM1 too that a lot of people are doing is they're looking at their plans, policies, and procedures. Many folks are coming into play and they're saying, I need to go away from this plan, which some plans are 3 inches thick, and I need a playbook. I need a 5-sheeter. How can I do that in a quick, rapid fashion? How do I make sure that it meets the federal, state, local, tribal, territorial requirements, and making sure that I can respond to and recover from an incident? Those are the things that we're seeing. And then trainings, exercises, press releases, helping write situation reports when there is a natural disaster that's taking place to better understand where they're going to place the
Right.
resources to be ready for the incident. We're seeing all of that take place and really goes back to my North Star of where I would love for people to say when they have a catastrophic incident, we planned for this, we
Yeah.
trained for it, we exercised for it.
I think the important point of all of this is it doesn't eliminate the human people in the organization. So if that project that you talked about where there was all these hazardous materials, and I think you made this point at the conference too, you might have AI assist in producing that, but you have human eyes that look at the final report. And you still have
100%.
human experience to be able to say the what ifs or to think about other things that might not have been considered by the AI. And I think this is a critical point to be made is that we're not talking about replacing people in EMA. We're talking about enhancing the ability of these people to do what they're there to do. And if I can instead of taking weeks to compile data of 250 material safety data sheets, and I can do it in a day. Now
Right.
I'm freed up to be able to look at that result and say, what else is missing? And
Yes.
now you're using higher level intelligence from that human who has experience from being maybe an EMA like you from multiple cities, or they've had multiple experiences in their career. Maybe they were involved in Katrina. They might have been involved in the California fires. They might have been involved in cleaning up after 9/11. They bring that experience to the table. So it's not about replacing people at all. What last words do you have for us that you think would be important for my audience to know?
Yeah, a couple of things. Going to what you say about AI, the human in the loop is vital, especially for making sure that we leverage our subject matter expertise. We are struggling, I think, across the entire enterprise with underfunded, understaffed, and under-resourced
Mm,
opportunities. So embracing technology is going to be an opportunity. One of the things I just say most importantly is the importance of planning, the importance of making sure that you can respond to and recover from incidents that happen within an entity, your jurisdiction, your business, and having that business recovery plan at your fingertips when that takes place is going to be important because no one wants to see people impacted by a disaster.
mm.
Unfortunately, these are realities, and the most important thing we can do in looking at these realities is taking time right now to prepare for and to be able to recover from any type of incident that might take place.
And I think that's a great final point to make. I mean, the importance of planning. It's always better to have a plan that has to be adapted at the moment than to not have a plan and you have to try
Not
to
at all.
create the plan as the moment's happening. So, Tom, thank you very much. And for people that listen to this, please make some comments below about some things that you might have thought about how some of the lessons from EMA could be impactful for people in business, other organizations. Some of the common themes is, again, planning, awareness, efficiencies, resource management, all of these things come into play when you're talking about running a business. It doesn't just have to be an emergency. If you don't have a plan to deal with whatever the incident is, you're likely not going to be able to convert that incident into a success. So until next time, let's go.